Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining this fireside chat on travel and privilege, where we will be exploring the role that privilege plays in our experience as travelers, how we can learn more about the privilege that we have, and how we can use this enhanced awareness to travel more mindfully, more purposefully, and more equitably. My name is Calliope Glaros from Philanthropy Without Borders. I am joined here today by two really good friends, both very intrepid travelers and also, I would say, scholars of the human experience. Albert William Worrell, also known as Rico, is a writer currently based in Los Angeles. His work explores themes of interpersonal connection, the nature of love, and the myth of the American dream. Pilar Montejo is an intercultural and organizational development consultant, originally from Colombia. She currently lives in Portland, Oregon, where she works as an independent consultant, and one of her projects is with Multnomah County, currently building resilience in culturally specific communities. Thank you both so much for being here. Not only do you both have such deep knowledge in this topic and so much wisdom to share, but also you happen to be some of my close friends. I've traveled with both of you in different times, and you were both actually present for some of the most transformational travel experiences that I've had in my life. So I'm tremendously honored to have you both here today. Before we really get into exploring more about this topic and chatting, I want to first clarify what we mean by the word privilege. When we're talking about privilege, we're really talking about an unearned advantage. So a privilege is not something that you've worked very hard to achieve. It's something typically that a person is born with that they benefit from in some way and often totally unknowingly. And so, for instance, traveling on a certain passport can be a privilege, particularly if you were bestowed that passport at birth. People from Japan and Germany and Singapore can travel to almost anywhere in the world without a visa, compared to folks in Yemen, Lebanon, and Bangladesh. And most people didn't even do anything to earn that passport except being born in a certain place to certain parents. We know that men move through this world in a very different way than women. Men can walk around the street at night, they can hail a taxi, they can stay out late at a bar and not really have to worry about being harassed or attacked. But in many parts of the world, women are frequently targeted or harassed just for going about their day. Again, it's an example where men didn't do anything to earn this kind of special access, but just by being born, by being assigned male at birth, they have more access to safety than others. Um, and you both know my partner Jonathan. What I want to share is that skin color and physical characteristics is also something that we don't get to choose at birth, and something that can play a role in the privilege that we experience or don't experience. And so, in one particular story, my partner is Chinese, and he was traveling with a group of um, other trekkers. They were going on a hike in the Himalayas, and they all happened to be white. And every time they would go into a restaurant or a hotel, the staff would immediately hand my partner the coats and the bags of the other people in his group. When they would begin to prepare the table at the restaurant, they would only prepare it for the white people in his group because they just looked at him, and based on his skin color and the way he looked, they assumed that he was their guide, that he was a staff, and that he was not part of their group. And he thought this experience was very funny, and it was not hurt by this, but we know that that kind of othering can be a hurtful experience, and it can even be dangerous in some cases. I think, and to complicate things even more when we talk about privilege, we also have experienced travel where his being Chinese actually gave us more access to better kinds of experiences. So I'm thinking a few years back when we were in Malaysian Borneo. It has a very large population of Chinese Malaysians there. And we were very much outside the tourist beat, and most of the local people just kind of ignored me, but they were very receptive to him as a Chinese person. People would see us walking on the street and pull over and asked if we needed a ride, and would actually give us a ride. People, which is like incredible. No, it wasn't a scam. Oh my goodness. And people would invite us to their home for meals. We were just shown like incredible hospitality and generosity, and I really think it was because they connected to my partner, through that sort of shared ethnic and cultural identity. So it's an example where his Chineseness was, you know, uh, was actually created more access, whereas in the Himalayas, it was othering. And so I think that, and I'm curious to hear from you about this. Like when we think about a place as vast and diverse as the Earth, um, privilege might give you increased access in one part of the world, and it might not do the same thing in another part of the world. And that's why I'm really excited to hear from you. And so, Rico, I know you have a different take on this word privilege. And I'd love to hear from you. What has your experience been around travel and privilege? What's your perspective on this?
Yeah, I mean, I do have a bit of a different take on the word, but I think the way that you contextualize it really sort of, you know, frames some of the, or gets at some of the concerns that I have, because the word is so fraught with kind of like these, terrible connotations. But I do know for a fact that I do experience privilege as I travel. I was reflecting on this idea of travel and privilege, and I was even thinking just about the mere fact that I do travel. For example, I know that I started traveling later than some of my peers. When I was younger, I went to a school that had a sort of mostly a mixed race and mixed class sort of setup, because it was a magnet school. And so, there were some of my peers who had been going on trips their whole lives, and the way that travel has worked for me is that I went on maybe 2 or 3 trips when I was a child, one within the nation, within the US, and then one to Canada. But I didn't really travel much more than that until I was, after I was 18 years old. Which is a thing in itself, just, how even just privilege within America can shape the way that we have access to travel, and what does it mean to have the time to take off, and to even be able to envision yourself in these other places. I talk to people about going to Mexico and places like that, and they can't even think of why they would go there, what they would do, and how they would get along, in some place that I don't even really experience as being that foreign from the US, because I know it so well. So definitely there's been some interaction between privilege and and travel for me. And you also touched on the thing about traveling as a man. I have a friend, she's an actress, and she told me once before that she was in Italy, of all places, and she was worried about traveling alone as a woman in Italy. And my brain, like, it really like opened up to my eyes the fact that as a man, I don't even think twice about these things.
Yeah, I think that's the thing about privilege, right? Is that if we don't kind of take the time to reflect, and definitely if we don't talk to people who are different from ourselves, we don't know. And so it's so hard. I think you also touched on like this idea of privilege. Like you talked about how you weren't able to travel much, when you were younger, but that those experiences really came to you as you were older. I mean, we're talking about basically economic stability, having disposable financial income, having a job that either gives you time off, or having a career where you can create that time off. And the nuance here, though, is that for people who were born into wealth, that's a privilege. They didn't earn that money. They just happened to be born to parents who had it. And for the people who, earned it, though, I wouldn't call that a privilege. I think that you have an advantage. You have it, but you earned it. You built your career, you earned that money, and so it's not really, it's not really privilege then. So that's kind of a nuance there that I think you brought up, which um, was really interesting. Pilar, I'd love to hear about your take on all of this and what your experience has been with travel and privilege.
So thank you for the comment about the people who work and earn it to have that advantage. Thank you for that clarification. Because I was born in a middle class family, but since early age, my mom taught me to travel, and she was employed and she was working for traveling. So I got that from early age, and I traveled because I work. Because I travel so I work. So I have to work
Yeah.
to travel. That's my goal. And you said I look for opportunities where I could travel and I don't depend on employer, or if I am employer does not give me that flexibility, I quit.
Mm-hmm.
So I look for those opportunities to manage my time. That's the reason right now I'm independent. And in terms of privilege, so I am Colombian, so I'm Latina, so English is not my first language. So I didn't earn that privilege. And my English is okay, but every now and then it's choppy. And of course, I have accent. And so as soon as I speak, I lose a lot of privileges because the one privilege that I carry that I didn't earn is that I am white. The color of my skin is white, but I am Latina. So as soon as I speak, I change color, and I lose all my privilege as white. And that happened to me when I travel to Europe, right? Or when I travel to in Latin America as well, or in Canada. So it's visible that when I speak, I am Latino. And but when I traveled to Thailand, I was white, and they couldn't identify my accent, so I was white. And in theory, I had a bunch of privilege because they, as you said, the Americans are treated differently, and they are put a lot of benefits on it. But one thing that surprised me or was uncomfortable for me was being as white means American, means dollars, means I have to get those dollars. That was quite a new experience for me, and that was not fun because then I felt stereotyped and I felt treated not in a nice way. When I travel, I want to have that human connection. I want to learn about the culture. I want to learn about their experiences and not necessarily for that financial transaction.
Mm-hmm.
But with hard work to travel to many countries, I actually I have traveled to 20 countries, and that has been a blessing, and that is in my veins.
Oh, thank you so much, Pilar.
Hmm.
I feel like, what you touched on, and thank you also for sharing your experience of race and color. I think that your example of people reading you as white, and then when you speak they realize, oh, she's not white, and their perception of you changes or their treatment of you changes. I feel like it's an example of the fluidity of this concept of whiteness when we think about race, and we often think that this is stagnant, it's unchanging, this is who we are. And actually, whiteness gets defined in different ways depending on where you are, right? And so, like in the United States, when people hear your accent, suddenly you're not white anymore. But then in other parts of the world, they don't notice your accent as much or they don't care, and you're still white. And then, so all of this is so, I feel like our characteristics, the way that we're born, what we're born with, we can't change that. But the way that those characteristics get interpreted around the world are so fluid. And I think the other thing you touched on is how, typically when we think about whiteness and having white privilege, we talk about the benefits that come with it, right? So, maybe the servers are kinder to you, or you get better treatment, better service. But then your story, it's like they target you for more money, and so you get hounded relentlessly. So it's like a negative aspect of it. And so, I think it's just really, your story really highlights kind of the complexity of this. This isn't so cut and dry, right?
Yeah, I mean that we all know about like tourist pricing and things like that too. So you get some of that that happens. I don't, obviously I'm not a white person, but when I travel, I've traveled quite a bit in Mexico, and so I get some of that like runoff from that, like being seen as an American. This idea. When people see me, they first off they assume that I'm only there to party, so they don't think I'm there for any sort of like cultural
They
enrichment.
probably don't assume you
Um,
speak Spanish, right?
they don't assume I speak Spanish, so generally they're surprised when I speak Spanish. And sometimes if I do speak Spanish to them, then they're trying to make sense of it, and they're trying to figure out, well, then where exactly are you from?
Mhm.
And then I'll get into conversations where they'll say, well, where's your mom from? And then where's her parents from?
Mm.
So that's a novelty thing too. But yeah, they'll think, oh, you're there to party. I got the hookup for all the party favors you want, and it's that sort of thing where they're ushering you to like the nearest bar, and you're just like, yeah, that's not what I'm looking for, you know.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think you both have kind of touched on this, but I'd be curious to hear you. I mean, we started the conversation around how has travel made you more self-aware, but I think both the power of travel is in that self-awareness. So you realize, what privilege you have and what you don't have, what biases you may hold and ones that you, are working through, but also it makes you more aware of other people, of how they live, what assumptions they're making about you. And so I'd just be curious to hear a little more about the ways that travel has increased your awareness about the self and others. Do you want to start, Pilar?
Sure. I have to be honest with you. I did not realize those things before I moved to the US. When I lived in Colombia and in Mexico, which were the first 35 years of my life, I was still traveling, but within America, right? Canada, Costa Rica, Argentina, different countries, and within these countries. And I never thought about that. It was only until I moved to the United States that I started learning about all the cultural differences and social justice and all of that I started becoming aware of that. And then now when I travel, I am more aware of those differences, not only because the privilege that I may carry with the color of the skin, but mostly to see the disadvantages or challenges that other cultures carry. And one of the things is not to jump into conclusions, not to judge others, but I become more curious about their stories and their lifestyles, and probably to engage in casual conversations, but with respect and just curiosity, because I don't think it's fair to be super curious and dig in their privacy that tokenize them, or like make them seem like a circus or stuff like that. I realized that more since I moved to the US 12, 13 years ago. And good, but when I was traveling before, it was just explore and enjoy, and I was seeing myself as equal all the time. And after I moved to the US and I started, and then I crossed the big lakes. So because I was always in America, now I went to Europe and I went to Asia. After I crossed that, I said, oh, that is really different, right? It's like different planets, but we're in the same planet. But crossing the oceans is totally changed the story. So
Yeah. Rico, did you also want to address anything in question two before I move on?
Well, yeah, I mean,
Loaded
I
one.
know in my way, so some of the very first travel that I had back when I went to Canada when I was a kid. I went to Canada when I was probably like, I don't know, 7 or 8 years old. It helped to sort of like it recontextualized experiences that I had had. So I went on a church trip, and this was travel that I went with my mom and some other people, and it was the first time that I had met like Black people that were not Black people like me.
Mm-hmm.
So we were in Montreal, and I met. We were surrounded by like a bunch of like Jamaican people, and it was the first time I ever had like goat in my life. I had goat
Oh.
curry. I still remember that meal. It was goat and green curry, and I remember just being like kind of like stunned. I didn't even know that goat was a thing, and I didn't know why it was so delicious. Um, and so here I was in this other world almost with these people who theoretically should have been the same as me, but had this whole completely different like cultural sort of experience. Um, and that always sort of stuck with me. I also remember thinking that maybe that their lives were different than mine. They didn't seem to be like poor, even though they were like Black people. They had accents that was really amusing to me. They're just like I was very aware that there was the culture was different, and so then it made me curious about like what else there was to explore, and the sort of privileged experience I was having in America as a young Black boy was sort of like shattered, right? Because suddenly you realize that the world is larger, and that when you go from place to place, privileges that you have in some places, are advantageous and not as advantageous in the same in different settings. So it was very interesting in that way. cut to maybe like a couple years ago, there I was in Naples, getting off a train, like, at like 12 midnight, in Naples, ready to go to where I was staying. And I walked out of the train station, and there was nothing but like African migrants. They were all around the train station. So here I was, kind of like on the opposite end of that same experience, where I was in some foreign place encountering people who had settled there or who had come to live there, and that shifting my experience. And now here I was in Italy, where these people were migrants. They were, in economically unstable situations, and it was kind of like, it was very jarring. One, because I didn't expect to get off of the train in Naples and be surrounded by, lots of African faces. And two, just because it was just like, okay, suddenly, I'm better off in this situation because, I'm in a more economically stable situation. I'm here as a visitor, and these people are trying to make a life here, and, everything that comes with that. So yeah, I mean, definitely, like, those are kind of like, ways that I've been in, like, you come face to face kind of like with yourself when you travel. And part of what you see is how the privileges that you have in some places, how they shift. So right, so even you were talking earlier about like shifting. We were saying something shifted earlier. We were talking about a shifting.
Yeah, what could be a privilege in one place that's creating more access and opportunity,
Yeah.
doesn't in another place.
Yeah, yeah. And so yeah, I see myself in these places too, and the things around me, and like my experiences, my privileges, and how those are not as they're not as, I think we were talking about skin color, and how like it's perceived, differently depending on where you are. But I think privileges too can kind of like, the benefits that are conferred are sort of shifting.
Absolutely.
As well.
I feel like what your story like so powerfully illustrates is how a lot of travelers who have economic privilege, either they were born with with access to money, um, born with powerful passports, that typically their first sort of encounter with privilege when they're traveling is going someplace and seeing people who are living with less material resources, right? Seeing people who are poor, and then they have these moments of oh, I should be grateful, I have a toilet in my house, I have running water.
Yeah.
And I think that there was some of that realization when you came face to face with the migrants and likely some refugees, who are in Italy. But I loved how you contrasted that with the story of your experience as a young kid in Montreal, where you saw Black people who were living a life that was different from the one that you knew and the one that everyone around you was living. And it seemed like what you were saying is that it expanded your concept of Blackness, that you can be Black and have an accent. You can be Black and have different kinds of cultures and eat different types of food, and have different, relationships to wealth and different sort of economic access. And also the idea of what life you can live in this world as a Black person, right? That whole concept expanded when you saw people who were living so different from you and your peers. And so I think in some ways, like the good side of travel is that it almost expands our possibilities. It gives us ideas for things that we didn't know were possible, right? And then also we have to confront, the privilege that we're born in certain places, that we have access to certain advantages that we didn't earn, and reckoning with that, knowing that you're going to leave that place and go back to your home with a toilet, and those people will continue to
Yes.
live without one, right?
Yeah. No, very much so. I made some connections with some folks when I was in Italy, migrants, and we went to lunch, and here I was listening to like the actual story of how they came to be in Naples, and me being like, that's like harrowing. Like I can't imagine like being on a boat in the water for like for days on end, and and then waiting to be rescued, and like like this is a reality that these folks are living. So yeah, very much expanded my ideas of around who I was, and what kind of experience I could have,
Mhm.
recontextualize some experiences I'd already had.
Yeah, thank you.
Um, mhm.
So I think the last question I have for our audience, I'd love to start with you, Rico, and then ask Pilar this question is, there's a lot of folks watching who are travelers themselves, and they're tired of being cooped up in the pandemic, and they're wanting to, go on their next journey, but to travel more mindfully and hopefully, more equitably. What advice do you have for them? What do you think they could do to leverage this transformational power of travel to be better people and to serve the world in a better way?
That's such a good question. And I'm always thinking about, how I can be a better traveler myself. Um, I guess probably the first thing that I would say is to go slow.
Mm,
Um, I think I think there's a temptation to sort of to rack up experiences, right? So, I mean, for example, I went to France a couple years ago, and I had a very limited amount of time there. It was my first time going there, and so of course, there you would think, oh, I need to see the Eiffel Tower, I need to go to the Louvre, I need to go to like, all these other places, and like, check the list, go get in the car and like have somebody like race you around and you get out and take a photo. Um, but I mean, realistically, I couldn't do it. I had just such little time there, literally just kind of like a connection. So then I was going to be heading back to the US. And so instead of doing that, I have an author that I really love, named James Baldwin. And he spent a lot of time in this one area of France, or Paris specifically, and in this one area. So I just went there to see if I can like kind of like chase some of like, the ghosts of his spirit in that area, and just to sort of like walk in his footsteps. And that was much more meaningful to me, had I, ran around the city, like, trying to like tick off everything off of my list. So I definitely say, like, if you have an itinerary and you've got like 10 places on there where you want to go, can you cut it to 5?
hmm
You know, um, if you can find a way to walk to some place instead of driving,
hmm
you should definitely do it. Because there's something about being on the ground, if you can walk, being on the ground, being on foot. There's something different about the way that you move through the space and the things that you take in. And I definitely, like, by walking, I get more acclimated to the area. I have a better sense of places when I return. Um, so that would probably be like my primary advice.
I totally agree. We need time to absorb what we're processing, right? And to
Mhm.
reflect on it. So I think that's fabulous advice. Pilar, you had touched on this earlier in the last question when you had said that you didn't start to think about privilege and power until you came to the United States and had a framework to really um, notice those things and talk
Mhm.
about them. And so I'm curious to hear from you, how can the folks be mindful and take those steps to learn something before they go on their journey?
So in the way I see it now is to travel with that awareness of the people culture. And let's say when I'm doing sightseeing, right, and see constructions or churches or buildings, so observe it with the eyes of the people who built that. In what context was that built? Who did it? Who were the actual labor on it?
Mhm.
And see how that shaped the culture that you see now, right? Because whatever happened in hundreds years or thousand years ago, it is what is shaping that culture. So seeing with those different eyes, and as Rico said, slow down, just practice stillness and just observe and reflect and get educated about what you are seeing and how the culture is now and how that is connected. That makes the experience so much richer, and it's so much easier to connect with that present and make that experience part of your life and make a difference in your life. So you have the two options. You could go very well structured with the tour, or you can get self-organized, or you can just go and get lost. I mean, and all of that could work perfectly depending who you are or the experience that you want to have at that time. And it's just to have a clear understanding what you want to get out of it and be ready to receive whatever happens there. So receive it as it comes.
Well, I love you, the advice from both of you. I think you both touched on this concept of the journey isn't just about when the plane lands. It happens inside yourself, before you travel. It's happening while you're traveling, and it's happening after you get home when you're processing those memories and relearning. So we're about at time. So thank you both so much. This was incredible. I'm so honored to have the experience to interview you both on this topic. I hope our audience learned a lot, and I'm really excited to be able to travel with you both again.
Yeah, thank you,
Thank you
Calliope.
for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you.